conventional attitudes in deck chairs and on adamantine deck bosses, and I talked to Miss Shute with feverish brilliancy, and wished the Patience cards were not in the cabin. I knew the supreme importance of keeping one's mind occupied, but I dare not face the cabin. There was a long, almost imperceptible swell, with little queer sea birds that I have never seen before, and trust I shall never see again, dotted about on its glassy slopes. The coastline looked low and grey and dull, as I think coastlines always do when viewed from the deep. The breeze that Bernard had promised us we should find outside was barely enough to keep us moving. The burning sun of 4 o'clock focused its heat on the deck. Bernard stood up among us, engaged in what he was pleased to call handling the stick, and beamed almost as offensively as the sun. "Oh, we're slipping along," he said, his odiously healthy face glowing like copper against the blazing blue sky. "You're going a great deal faster than you think, and the men say we'll pick up a breeze once we're round the mizzen." I made no reply. I was not feeling ill, merely thoroughly disinclined for conversation. Miss Sally smiled wanly, and closing her eyes, laid her head on Philippa's knee. Instructed by a dread freemasonry, I knew that for her the moment had come when she could no longer bear to see the rail rise slowly above the horizon, and with an equal rhythmic slowness sink below it. Maria moved restlessly to and fro, panting and yawning, and occasionally rearing herself on her hind legs against the side, and staring forth with wild eyes at the headachy sliding of the swell. Perhaps she was meditating suicide. If so, I sympathised with her, and since she was obviously going to be sick, I trusted that she would bring off the suicide with as little delay as possible. Philippa and Miss Shute sat in unaffected serenity in deck chairs, and stitched at white things, tea cloths for the Eileen Ogue, I believe, things in themselves a mockery, and talked untiringly, with that singular indifference to their marine surroundings that I have often observed in ladies who are not seasick. It always stirs me afresh to wonder why they have not remained ashore. Nevertheless, I prefer their tranquil and total lack of interest in seafaring matters to the blatant Vikingism of the average male who is similarly placed. Somehow, I know not how, we crawled onwards, and by about 5 o'clock we had rounded the mizzen, a gaunt spike of a headland that starts up like a boar's tusk above the ragged lip of the Irish coast, and the Eileen Ogue was beginning to swing and wallop in the long sluggish rollers that the American liners know and despise. I was very far from despising them. Down in the west, resting on the sea's rim, a purple bank of clouds lay awaiting the descent of the sun, as seductively and as malevolently as the damp bed at a hotel awaits a traveller. The end, so far as I was concerned, came at tea time. The meal had been prepared in the saloon, and thither it became incumbent upon me to accompany my hostess and my wife. Miss Sally, long past speech, opened, at the suggestion of tea, one eye, and disclosed a look of horror. As I tottered down the companion, I respected her good sense. The Eileen Ogue had been built early in the 60s, and the headroom was not her strong point. Neither, apparently, was ventilation. I began by dashing my forehead against the frame of the cabin door, and then, shattered morally and physically, entered into the atmosphere of the pit. After which things, and the sight of a plate of rich cake, I retired in good order to my cabin, and began upon the Janitas. I pass over some painful intermediate details, and resume at the moment when Bernard Shute woke me from a drugged slumber to announce that dinner was over. "It's been raining pretty hard," he said, swaying easily with the swing of the yacht, "but we've got a clinking breeze, and we ought to make Loriga Harbour tonight. There's a good anchorage there, the men say. They're rather a lot of swabs, but they know this coast, and I don't. I took 'em over with the ship, all standing." "Where are we now?" I asked, somewhat heartened by the blessed word anchorage. "You're running up Sheepskin Bay. It's a thundering big bay. Loriga's up at the far end of it, and the night's as black as the inside of a cow. Dig out and get something to eat and come on deck. What, no dinner?" I had spoken morosely, with closed eyes. "Oh, rot! You're on an even keel now. I promised Mrs. Yates I'd make you dig out. You're as bad as a soldier officer that we were ferrying to Malta one time in the old Tamar. He got one leg out of his berth when we were going down the Channel, and he was too sick to pull it in again till we got to Gib. I compromised on a drink and some biscuits. The ship was certainly steadier, and I felt sufficiently restored to climb weakly on deck. It was by this time past 10 o'clock, and heavy clouds blotted out the last of the afterglow and smothered the stars at their birth. A wet, warm wind was lashing the Eileen Ogue up a wide estuary. The waves were haunting her, hissing under her stern, racing up to her, crested with the white glow of phosphorus as she fled before them. I dimly discerned in the greyness the more solid greyness of the shore. The mainsail loomed out into the darkness, nearly at right angles to the yacht, with the boom creaking as the following wind gave us an additional shove. I know nothing of yacht sailing, but I can appreciate the grand fact that in running before a wind the boom is removed from its usual sphere of devastation. I sat down beside a bundle of rugs that I had discovered to be my wife, and thought of my whitewashed office at Sri Lane and its bare but stationary floor with a yearning that was little short of passion. Miss Sally had long since succumbed. Miss Shute was tired, and had turned in soon after dinner. "I suppose she's overdone by the delirious gaiety of the afternoon," said I, acridly, in reply to this information. Philippa cautiously poked forth her head from the rugs, like a tortoise from under its shell, to see that Bernard, who was standing near the steersman, was out of hearing. "In all your life, Sinclair," she said impressively, "you never knew such a time as Cecilia and I have had down there. We've had to wash everything in the cabins, and remake the beds, and hurl the sheets away. They were covered with black finger marks. And while we were doing that, in came the creature that calls himself the steward to ask if he might get something of his that he had left in Miss Shute's birthplace, and he rooted out from under Cecilia's mattress a pair of socks and half a loaf of bread. Consolation to Miss Shute to know her berth has been well aired," I said, with the nearest approach to enjoyment that I had known since I came on board. "And has Sally made any equally interesting discoveries?" "She said she didn't care what her bed was like, she just dropped into it. I must say I'm sorry for her," went on Philippa. "She hated coming. Her mother made her accept." "I wonder if Lady Knox will make her accept him," I said. "How often has Sally refused him? Does anyone know?" "Oh, about once a week," replied Philippa. "Just the way I kept on refusing you, you know." Something cold and wet was thrust into my hand, and the aroma of damp dog arose on the night air. Maria had issued from some lair at the sound of our voices, and was now, with palsied tremblings, slowly trying to drag herself on to my lap. "Poor thing, she's been so dreadfully ill," said Philippa. "Don't send her away, Sinclair. Mr. Shute found her lying in his berth, not able to move. Didn't you, Mr. Shute?" "She found out that she was able to move," said Bernard, who had crossed to our side of the deck. "It was somehow borne in upon her when I got at her with a boot tree. I wouldn't advise you to keep her in your lap, Yates. She stole half a ham after dinner, and she might take a notion to make the only reparation in her power." I stood up and stretched myself stiffly. The wind was freshening, and though the growing smoothness of the water told that we were making shelter of some kind, for all that I could see of land we might as well have been in mid ocean. The heaving lift of the deck under my feet, and the lurching swing when a stronger gust filled the ghostly sails, were more disquieting to me in suggestion than in reality; and to my surprise I found something almost enjoyable in rushing through darkness at the pace at which we were going. "We're a small bit short of the mouth of Lariga harbour yet, sir," said the man who was steering, in reply to a question from Bernard. "I can see the shore well enough. Sure, I know every yard of water in the bay." As he spoke he sat down abruptly and violently. So did Bernard, so did I. The bundle that contained Philippa collapsed upon Maria. "Main sheet!" bellowed Bernard, on his feet in an instant, as the boom swung in and out again with a terrific jerk. "We're ashore!" In response to this order, three men in succession fell over me while I was still struggling on the deck, and something that was either Philippa's elbow or the acutest angle of Maria's skull hit me in the face. As I found my feet, the cabin skylight was suddenly illumined by a wave